We understand now that all who live on this planet share a common fate. A fortune bound to the health of what a young Soviet poet, looking at a picture of Earth from deep space, has called this tiny heart that beats in the universe. Late in the 20th century, when so much is known about the world we live in, with far-reaching environmental decisions rising from reams of data, there remains a fellow creature with whom we still have what might be called a pure relationship. An affair altogether of the heart. The appeal is unexplained, yet undeniable. To hear the gentle, confiding notes is to bathe in life's music. To be sure, Thoreau did see the sky in the Bluebird's back, but could the sky ever really be so blue? And could beauty alone so stir the beholder, or does the Bluebird somehow touch a deeper nerve? Perhaps to a greater extent than in the whales, or the eagles, or even the family dog, we see in the Bluebird a spirit shared, a tiny heart that beats for all. We might say that because our feelings for these birds are so strong, our understandings of them are rather weak. The chroniclers of the Bluebird give us much anecdote, but little by way of recorded population dynamics. In fact, the vessel of information on America's best-loved birds is at best half full, and those who add most to it are the amateurs, those whose interest is based in love. The Bluebird story, as much of it as we know, is as old only as the presence of European peoples in North America, for bluebirds live nowhere else. The first Europeans found the eastern bluebird living at the edges of Native Americans' clearings. The blue robin, as the early settlers called the bird, seemed especially pleased with a concept in landscaping introduced by the newcomers, the orchard. The fruit trees grew and matured to create hollows, superior housing to the sparse crannies of forest edges. The older the orchard, the better, for an apple tree or a pear tree gnarls with the decades as fruit-heavy branches break and scar the trunks. Orchards meant trees surrounded with grass, growing an ever-ripening crop of worms, caterpillars, and grasshoppers. With dead twigs from which to view the selection and nesting cavities for use in family time, orchards were a boon to the bluebirds. Following the orchards, the bluebirds prospered with settlers in farm and village. In fact, it probably wasn't long before a scattering of nest boxes topped a post here and there. By the time John James Audubon made his studies of North American birds early in the 1800s, the crafting of nest boxes for bluebirds connoted elegance. It still does. After nest boxes, the next venture in human technology to benefit the bluebirds was utility wires. They may not be pretty to us, but the wires anchor the feeding economics of today's bluebirds. The clear view and optimal height shift the advantage in insect hunting decisively in the bluebird's favor. Most of the bluebirds we see in passing are hunting insects from wires. Even flying insects present opportunities. Utility wires, green space, nest boxes, they're all part of the quiet triumph of bringing back our bluebirds. It's a very appealing story, and one our National Audubon Society invites us to savor. I'm Michael Godfrey, your host as we meet our bluebirds up close. All three of our bluebirds are primarily insect eaters. Their diet may shift in winter toward berries, but berries encrusted with snow and ice are of little use. So the bluebirds must migrate from the northern parts of their nesting ranges in the coldest months. They keep a foothold in North America throughout the year, though, and most individuals of all three species winter in the U.S. In those parts of the country where bluebirds winter, there are opportunities to begin relationships which could last all year. We don't know whether an individual western bluebird wintering, for example, near San Francisco, will go north to nest, or that a given mountain bluebird wintering in Durango, Colorado, will seek a higher elevation in spring. We can say, though, that except in the arid Southwest, if you have bluebirds in winter, you'll probably have bluebirds in the nesting season. One sure way to find out if there are bluebirds wintering in your neighborhood is to offer mealworms. These delicacies will attract just about every bird, but a bluebird feeder will assure that at least some will be available to the invited guests. With few exceptions, only bluebirds will enter an enclosure to feed. The female will likely be first, but in time the male will catch on. Once your bluebirds have accepted the idea, you can use the mixture of animal fat, cornmeal, and peanut butter, which many insect-eating birds relish in winter. You might look into the prepared bluebird foods now available. In 1880, the great naturalist John Burroughs observed that New Englanders wait for the bluebird's arrival in spring to begin the maple sugar harvest. Southward, The bluebird's courtship commences with the very earliest hints of spring. The redbud's blush, the flash of dogwood under the oaks. The murmured love song melts back the edge of winter. The male casually flexes his blues. He casts longing glances at his mate above and yields to the ardor of the season. The literature on bluebird behavior asserts that under pair bonding protocol, the male lays claim to a territory and defends it against rivals. If he's fortunate, the territory attracts a female. In choosing a territory, the female also selects a mate, the male who controls the territory she selects. If the sociobiologists are to be believed, the goal that drives the behavior of the male of any species is that of maximizing his impact upon the gene pool. For a male bluebird, success depends on his ability to defend a territory with plenty of grassy open space and a suitable nesting cavity. The perfect nest box in the middle of a forest or a parking lot will be of no interest. Acres of greensward devoid of the requisite nest cavity will go unused. But a nest box at the edge of a pasture, a golf course, or a spacious lawn creates the circumstance of success for the male bluebird with gene sharing on his mind. Fortunately, there are open grasslands in most neighborhoods, urban and rural. Only a few acres are needed to provide hunting grounds for a bluebird family. The national shortage of suitable territories results from want of nesting cavities. In short, the bluebird's problem in recent decades has been inadequate housing. The shortage has resulted from loss of orchards and other trees with natural cavities combined with competition by alien birds. The housing crisis we can do something about. On the heels of retreating winter, this radiant male lays claim to a territory he knows will draw a female's attention. The house fits his instincts precisely. Its entrance is exactly the 1.5 inches he prefers, just large enough for a bluebird. The floor is 4 inches square and 6 inches below the opening. The house is on a pole 5 feet off the ground. It's in the open and it faces away from the prevailing wind so that rain won't blow in. The grounds around offer perfect hunting. The bluebird can see the flick of a fly, the arch of an inchworm, at 100 yards. It's but a matter of time before the azure mantle, presiding over such a kingdom, works its magic. The male implies economic security by bringing food to the female at the proposed home site. In this case, she's too busy sorting through her building materials to bother with food, so he eats it himself. The little ritual of food offerings is a touching tenderness of bluebird courtship. With accommodations decided, the female begins construction in earnest. She works with dispatch, often completing the structure in a day or two. Pine straw and fine plant material are preferred. She may utilize twigs and leaves in the foundation. She does not use sticks, nor does she use feathers. Her preferences on building materials can be important as we watch for clues that her nest has been challenged by intruders. These goldfinches are not intruders. They're not even cavity nesting birds. On the reason for their impish interest in the bluebirds, we can only speculate. As the female labors at construction, the male watches. It's tempting to comment on this inequity, but actually the male is very much a participant, always in close attendance during nest building. He takes a conspicuous perch as she gathers. As she approaches with a load, he sings and waves his wings, a one-bird cheering section. His conspicuous presence advertises that the territory is well defended, and his encouragement strengthens the bond between them. Occasionally, if we watch very carefully, we may see the male carry a sprig of nest material. This is symbolic, a way of saying, "Look at this grand nesting cavity at the center of my territory. Build our home here, and I'll defend it." When she believes they won't freeze, the female begins to lay her eggs, one each day, until she has a clutch of 4 or 5, perhaps 6. The color varies from turquoise to nearly white. She does not begin to incubate until all the eggs are laid. As a result, about 2 weeks later, the young hatch on the same day. Because they're of equal age, the developing bluebirds enjoy equal access to food in the nest, fledge together, and spend much of the remaining summer moving and feeding as a unit. By this strategy, bluebirds and many other birds feed and protect their young as a group and gain time for multiple broods in a busy nesting season. Incubation is also the female's burden, for only she is equipped with a brood patch, a zone on her belly on which the feathers part to warm the eggs against her skin. She leaves periodically to feed, returning in a few minutes with the all-important body heat to power the development of the embryos. If she is lost during incubation, the nest is doomed, for the male has no means to incubate. So he stays close by to attack or distract should danger threaten during this very vulnerable period. His defense of the nest can be surprisingly aggressive. When the young hatch, the male shares with the female nearly equally the gathering of groceries, though he'll take time out to sing and be conspicuous. Food is soft-bodied insects, sometimes pulped a bit before presentation. As the young grow, so do the morsels and the frequency of feeding. During their average 18 days in the nest, these tiny, naked hatchlings will eat about 700 insects each, multiplying their body weight 20-fold. And they'll grow a complete set of feathers. To raise this brood, the adults will bring 3,000 to 4,000 insects into the nest. Of this insect mass, the young will retain about 10% in their growing bodies. The nest is completely enclosed so something must be done with the other 90%. On just about each visit, the adult bluebird offers food, then spends a moment watching for other needs. Need is signified by the trembling presentation of a membrane-wrapped package of waste to be carried from the nest. On the 18th morning, give or take a day or two, the young are restive. In traditional accommodations, they begin to explore the nest opening. At the opening of nest boxes, heads appear. For the first time, this young bluebird utters a sound other than the squeaking food demand of the nestling. In a clear, gentle whistle, it announces to the world, "I am a bluebird." The male answers. For a time, father and fledgling call to one another as the young bird gathers courage. This first venture into 3 dimensions is purely a response to a call from the life that lies ahead. Food is not withheld. In fact, feeding intensifies just before fledging, as if to give the aspiring flyers extra strength. A watershed moment in the life of this young bird has arrived. Wings that could not have been trained or tested in any way must power this fledgling from the safety of the nest, to which it will never return. One of the head thrusts into the outside world ends not in withdrawal, but in an act of raw courage, in a headlong launch into a world of promise and peril. Having previously not moved more than a few inches, the young bluebird has flown 100 yards and gained 70 feet of altitude. Within an hour, nestmates perch beside it, joyfully riding the winds high in an oak. Here, safe from most harm, their parents will feed them for a time. Soon they'll follow the adults about the territory, begging for food, and eventually learning for themselves the grasshopper trade. In the bluebird's nesting cycle, we can see the importance of our own role. Checking on the bird's progress is the only way we'll know when the eggs hatch and when fledging is due. If the nest doesn't progress on schedule, there may be a problem with predators or parasites, and we need to know that. And very importantly, as soon as the young fledge, the nest box must be cleaned. Lifting the nest free, we look for the pupal cases of parasitic flies. If they're present, we may need to carefully remove them from under future broods. Under the nest, we're sure to find a flurry of what looks like dandruff, the chitinous sheaths of developing feathers. It can harbor mites and should be removed. Care and respect are always watchwords. After about the 15th day, there's a risk that opening the box might cause a premature fledging, forcing the young into a world for which they're not yet ready.
Don't want to disturb more than that.
Most of the Bluebird's competitors are natives and are legitimate members of the North American biotic family. Nuthatches usually excavate their own homes, but may use a bluebird box, most likely one placed in woods. The tree swallow, or in the Northwest its ecological equivalent, the violet-green swallow, we can welcome simply by providing additional housing. In the Northeast and North-Central states, the range of the eastern bluebird is shared by the tree swallow. Bluebirds and tree swallows are tolerant of one another, and many consider them equally endearing. Within the tree swallow's nesting range, many bluebird boxes can coexist. Under this concept, the resident pair of bluebirds will take the box they prefer, and the rest will be available to the tree swallows. The house wren nests across most of the United States. It's a tireless early morning songster, a picker of worms off roses, and it has many friends. Given its practice of filling all nesting cavities in its territory with false nests, the house wren can be a strong competitor with bluebirds.
The house wren made that announcement back in July. It's November now, so we can venture an assessment of what he was talking about. There was a pair of bluebirds nesting across the street. This house was put up a little bit late. The bluebirds came over and put a false nest in the bottom, these pine needles here. The house wren then took over and stuffed the box to the top with these sticks, his characteristic building material. The net effect of it all was that the box went unused with two false nests in it all summer. Had it been put up in late winter, very likely the bluebirds would have taken it and almost certainly would have defended it against the house wrens.
Chickadees and titmice are also cavity nesters. They can use a smaller opening than bluebirds. A nest box with an opening of 1 1/8 inches is of no interest to bluebirds, but it will satisfy the resident chickadees. The continent-wide shortage of old trees worked by woodpeckers affects not only birds. The flying squirrel in its range may appropriate a bluebird box fixed to a tree or a pole, the escape route of this amazing little mammal. The bluebirds have two very deadly competitors. Both are alien birds, both major ecological blunders on our part. One of these aliens is the European starling, introduced in 1890. The starling is a cavity nesting bird, not necessarily content with the eaves and crannies of human construction. This starling eyes the bluebird's nest in the pear tree. If it likes what it sees, it'll make short work of the occupants, usurping one more natural cavity formerly available to bluebirds. Fortunately, this numberless and aggressive scourge can be excluded by constructing a nest box with an opening of the correct size. The starling is the reason the nest box opening must be exactly 1.5 inches across. Too small for the starling, just large enough for the bluebird. Sadly, the remedy for the numerous and aggressive house sparrow is not so simple. A 1.5 inch opening suits it just fine. So does a bluebird box. Introduced in 1851, the house sparrow exploded in numbers, confirming the folk wisdom, two can live as cheaply as one if one is a sparrow and the other a large ungulate. The problem with house sparrows goes beyond its feeding tastes. Soon after introduction, it effectively eliminated other cavity nesting birds from North American cities. Then, soon enough, from the farmlands in many localities as well. The pugnacious copophagists displaced native insect eaters like the tree swallow, the house wren, and of course, the bluebirds. This pair of bluebirds tries valiantly to defend its nest box. But once the local horde of house sparrows takes an interest, their ceaseless harassment inevitably drives the bluebirds out. So confident are these avian hyenas that they brazenly copulate adjacent to the bluebird box they expect to appropriate. Ultimately, the house sparrow's messy nidifications dangle from the opening. The male bluebird cannot remove them as fast as they appear. The outcome was never in question. Concern for our bluebirds, or more broadly, a sense of obligation to our legitimate native wildlife, leads to a conclusion which many find unpleasant. If we're to have bluebirds, we must help defend them against the house sparrow. It's not enough to put up nest boxes. The boxes must be managed actively, daily, during the nesting season. Mary Janatatos is Executive Director of the North American Bluebird Society.
They are one of the birds that will be totally dependent on human help. And so it is very important to constantly stimulate interest in people putting out nesting boxes and monitoring them. Very important to monitor the boxes that are put out. Otherwise, they will become sparrow trails, because the house sparrow, the English house sparrow, the alien which most directly affects the bluebirds, can enter the bluebird box and will not only enter that box, but will kill the adult bluebirds.
We left our newly fledged brood of bluebirds high up in an oak. The season is short. Within a fortnight, the female returns to the nest box to begin a second brood. The male is a blur of action, feeding and leading the first troop of youngsters, murmuring sustaining songs to his mate on her rounds. As she incubates, the fledglings grow under his care, and by the time the second brood of the summer faces its supreme test, the first brood may be part of the helping force. Autumn touches the stream, and the bluebirds rest from their labors. In the east, bluebirds band into small groups. In the southwest, mountain bluebirds gather in flocks of 100 or more. But the dancing colors and the cold to follow need not suspend our relationship with the bluebirds. In fact, the winter presence of your bluebird nest box can be as important as having it in place during the nesting season. The bluebirds may roost in the box on cold nights. More importantly, the shortage of nesting sites is so critical in most areas that the bluebirds may take a territorial interest in a nest box as early as autumn in order to be in place on the territory in spring.
The bluebird's year is a thrilling story, and it's one in which we play a very important role, either by design or by default. For if we do nothing, the bluebirds lose ground. But if we act decisively, the bluebirds continue their recovery, and we earn priceless moments of satisfaction with one of nature's great gifts. And very fortunately, there's some recent innovations in bluebird technology. This box, or one of any number of variations of it, has become pretty much standard, with a 1 1/2 inch opening placed 6 inches above the floor, which is 4 inches square. And there are drainage holes at the bottom and ventilation ports under the eaves. But the most important feature is the ability to open the box to check on the progress of the birds with minimal disturbance.
There's another design now popular, featuring a sloping top and front to discourage predators. There's no broad agreement on which is the better design. There is a consensus, though, that the nest box must be protected from predators. The idea here is to make it difficult for a cat or a raccoon to sit on top and reach inside. There's a baffle inside to block the unwelcome paw. To test some concepts in predator-proofing, we went to Barbara Roth, founding president of the New Hope Audubon chapter in North Carolina. Barbara enjoys feeding the raccoons which come to her porch in the evenings. The raccoons find no difficulty investigating a standard box on a wooden post. The dog food kibble is coming from the floor of the box, 6 inches below the opening. If there were baby birds inside, it's clear what the results would be. When our experiment substitutes a polished steel pipe, the raccoons, in this instance, don't attempt to climb. But these are fat, slothful southern coons whose lean cousins in Michigan are known to have climbed an identical post. A predator guard fixed to the steel pole is needed if the bluebird clutch is to be assured protection from the procyonid paw. In order to test the sloping design, we had to place it on the wooden post. The raccoon's arm doesn't reach the dog food on the bottom. The bluebird's nest, though, would raise the contents closer to the opening, so we can't say they're safe. Again, a predator guard will require the raccoons to make other arrangements altogether.
Her since she was a baby and she's used to being fed. She's not sure really how to go out and catch food. All right, she's been.
Why did you hatch her?
Well, someone brought an egg to us. They didn't know what it was. They were digging a garden and they said, "Here, see what you can do with it." And when it hatched, it was a snake. And very lucky,
Snakes. In spite of a lingering Freudian slant, we're coming to value and respect them, to see them woven as tightly as the birds into our ecological tapestry. This is Audubon's Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary near Naples, Florida.
Very friendly. Very friendly. See how she has that nice shiny blue color to her? That's where she gets her name Indigo. Eastern Indigo.
Visiting children, free of prejudice and misinformation, respond with pure enchantment to the grace and beauty of an indigo snake.
Oh, Lord!
Oh, Lord. Send her over this way.
Somebody had kind of brave for picking up by the garden. I don't think I would.
Alice, we need you back where you were. You don't want her to get stepped on here. There you go. See how the muscles move to make her move along the ground?
It looks like she's moving fast like the river. I know.
Some snakes, especially in the south, can develop a taste for nestlings. Audubon member Stan Alford rescues and rehabilitates injured snakes. Stan's yellow rat snake is a constrictor and one of the most arboreal of North American snakes. This one is 3 feet long and an inch in diameter. But when of a mind to climb and explore, it can squeeze through the half-inch opening at the top of this predator guard. When we substitute a guard with quarter-inch openings, the rat snake can only test the air for traces of bluebird. In the mountainous west, bluebird lovers are doubly rewarded, for there are two species west of the Great Plains, the western and the mountain bluebirds. They're largely tolerant of one another, occasionally nesting in adjacent boxes. There are even instances of interbreeding between bluebird species. Contrary to eastern misconceptions, both the westerly bluebirds enthusiastically accept man-made nesting boxes. This is Art Aylesworth of Ronan, Montana. On this day, we find him leading members of the North American Bluebird Society who have gathered from all over the continent, many from Canada, to tour one of his bluebird trails. A gentle and unassuming man, Art, and those who work with him, have placed more than 23,000 bluebird boxes along hundreds of miles of Montana roads. Each year, literally thousands of western and mountain bluebirds fledge into the splendors of the Montana Rockies from Art's nest boxes. What Art Aylesworth has done in scenic Montana, Chet Rindak is doing on the outskirts of Chicago.
House sparrows, they're all looking for that box.
Along one of the major commuter routes north of this vast city, Chet has built a bluebird trail at the River Trail Nature Center.
Bluebirds are just a little more aggressive, I think, and they wind up by taking over those boxes, and bluebirds lose out. But now that we've put so many in, this is fantastic this year. We were going to have over 38 to possibly 40 young banded, and we have several of the adults already banded. If we get them all banded this year, which I don't think we'll get them all.
Not in Chet's lifetime had the eastern bluebird been part of the Chicago community. For the first few years, this bluebird trail along the Des Plaines River played to an empty house. But with Chet's persistence, it has brought the bluebirds back. By providing nesting spaces, we're helping to correct the ecological disadvantages bluebirds face. Before the recent widespread offering of nest boxes, they simply had no place to call home. Informed observers estimate that today, a majority of successful bluebird nestings take place in nest facilities provided by man. Who can say why these birds are so trusting of us, tolerating our presence, and even appearing to seek human companionship? By accepting our hospitality and gracing our landscape, they seem to become family members, sharing with us the fortunes of the times. If the precise reason for this attraction eludes us, no matter. We are not alone. There are others who simply want to be friends with the bluebird.